Welcome to Hardly, where books turn into 3 stories, refreshing your knowledge in minutes. Today we listen to Curzan's Says Who, a kinder, funner usage guide for everyone who cares about words in which we probe into. How language is not just a set of rules, but a dynamic, evolving system that reflects the diversity and creativity of its speakers. Curzan is the Geneva Smitherman Collegiate Professor of English, Linguistics and Education and an Arthur F. Thurno Professor at the University of Michigan, where she also currently serves as the Dean of the College of Literature, Science and the Arts. Don't go away, Hardly, the editor will be right back with the story. Today, I'm going to share 3 intriguing stories that illustrate how language, far from being rigid and rule-bound, is a living, breathing entity shaped by the people who use it. We'll explore a dinner party disagreement that exposed the fluidity of grammar, a mother's lifelong battle with a mispronunciation, and a linguistics professor's surprising realization about a regional quirk. Story 1. The dinner party disagreement. Imagine this, a cozy dinner party where the conversation flows easily until someone drops a linguistic bombshell. A friend of mine, let's call him David, was adamant that the word impact should never be used as a verb. Only teeth can be impacted, he declared, as he confidently sliced into his steak. The room fell silent. Everyone suddenly hyper-aware of their own word choices. David's claim was grounded in what he believed to be an unbreakable rule of English, one that he had no intention of violating. But then, another guest, a linguist, chimed in. Actually, the verb impact has been in use since the early 17th century. She went on to explain that language evolves, and what might have been considered incorrect or non-standard at one time can become perfectly acceptable as people begin to use it more frequently. She even pulled out a book she had with her, quoting, "Impact has been a verb longer than it has been a noun." David, somewhat deflated, realized that his understanding of language was more about adhering to outdated rules than embracing the way language naturally changes. The conversation shifted, and what began as a rigid assertion turned into a lively discussion about how we all unknowingly participate in the evolution of language every day. Story 2. A mother's lifelong battle. Next, let's talk about my friend's mother, a woman who spent her entire life correcting everyone around her. She was a grammando of the highest order, one of those people who would interrupt your story to correct your grammar, whether you liked it or not. Her biggest pet peeve? The word "a case" instead of "ask." It drove her crazy, especially when she heard it from her children. "It's ask, not ax," she would snap, her face flushed with the fervour of someone defending a sacred text. This obsession wasn't just a quirk. It was deeply personal. She had grown up in a community where using "a case" was common, and she had been ridiculed for it in school. The sting of that shame never left her, and she swore she would never allow her children to suffer the same fate. Every mispronunciation was a battle in a war she'd been fighting since childhood. But then, as she grew older and her grandchildren came along, she began to soften. One day, she heard her granddaughter proudly proclaim, "I'm going to a-case you a question." And instead of correcting her, she smiled. She realized that language is a reflection of who we are and where we come from, and that her battle had been less about protecting her children and more about exercising her own childhood demons. She quoted a passage she had once scoffed at. Language is deeply personal and fundamentally social. Story 3. The Professor's Surprise. Finally, there's the story of a linguistics professor who thought she knew everything there was to know about American English. That is, until she moved to the Midwest and encountered something she'd never heard before: people using anymore in a positive context. For instance, instead of saying, "I don't eat red meat anymore," they would say, "I eat healthy anymore." The first time she heard it, she was certain it was a mistake. She even considered correcting the person, but something stopped her. Instead, she decided to investigate. She learned that this usage of anymore wasn't a mistake at all, but a regional dialect feature known as positive anymore. It's common in certain parts of the Midwest and has been in use for generations. The professor was stunned. She had always seen anymore as inherently negative, but here was a whole community using it positively, and they had been doing so long before she ever studied linguistics. This discovery was humbling. It reminded her that no matter how much she knew, language would always have the capacity to surprise her. She quoted a sentiment from her favorite text: "Our language says a lot about who we are and where we come from." Now, after hearing these stories, it becomes clear that language isn't a fixed set of rules handed down from on high. It's a dynamic, evolving system that reflects the diversity and creativity of its speakers. The idea that language is something to be strictly controlled and regulated is an illusion. In reality, it changes and adapts as people find new ways to express themselves. These stories illustrate that holding on to rigid rules about language can blind us to its richness and variety. Instead of trying to preserve a so-called correct version of English, we should celebrate the ways in which language evolves. Every time we speak, write, or even correct someone's grammar, we're contributing to that evolution. We are all, in a sense, co-authors of the English language. As the editor of Hardly, by embracing the dynamic nature of language, we can foster a future where communication is not about adhering to outdated rules, but about connecting with others in the most effective and inclusive ways possible. To wrap things up, let's revisit our key point. Language is a dynamic, evolving system shaped by its speakers. We've seen how grammar and usage are far from rigid rules. They are constantly changing as people find new ways to express themselves. This idea was further driven home by a fascinating story I came across about a word that many of us have been taught to avoid: irregardless. For years, irregardless has been labelled as incorrect, a non-word that should be struck from any respectable sentence. Yet, despite its controversial status, it has persisted in everyday speech. In fact, it's been around since the late 18th century, appearing in newspapers, legal documents, and even in the speeches of educated individuals. The persistence of irregardless is a testament to the fact that language does not abide by strict rules set by grammarians. Instead, it evolves according to how people actually use it. One might scoff at the word, but its continued existence challenges the notion that any word can be completely illegitimate if it serves a communicative purpose. This story underscores that language is less about following strict rules and more about adaptability, creativity, and connection. As we've seen throughout this journey, every word we use contributes to the ongoing evolution of English. As the editor of Hardly, embracing this evolution can empower us to communicate more effectively and inclusively, ensuring that language remains a vibrant tool for expressing our ever-changing human experience.